You know, when we talk about getting closer to God, what does that path actually look like? Is it just a feeling, or is there more to it? Well, it turns out for many, it's a very real, structured journey, an ascent with clear stages. Today, we're going to walk through a profound spiritual map that lays out this exact path, the 4 stations of ascent to divine power.
So here's our game plan. We'll start with the idea of the journey itself, then look at that big shift from self to submission. After that, we'll see how it turns into action, unpack what surrender really means here, and finally connect it all to a power that moves through everything.
All right, let's start at the beginning, the quest itself, this desire to connect with something bigger than ourselves. Well, that's a core part of being human, right? It's a journey people have been trying to map for centuries. So how do we find our way? And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Does it mean you have to try harder, read more books, or is it something else entirely? The framework we're about to explore has a really fascinating answer to that.
And here it is. This is the map. Just look at the progression here. We start by walking by ourselves, then with God, then in God, and finally we arrive at a state where we realize only God acts. It's a path from individual struggle all the way to this incredible realization. So let's take that first step together.
Okay, so the journey kicks off with a massive shift in perspective. It's about moving away from this idea that everything, absolutely everything, depends on our effort, and starting to see a power that's just so much greater than we are.
Now check out this contrast. In Station 1, it's all about me, my prayers, my struggles, my good deeds. But then, in Station 2, something incredible happens. The spotlight swings from the self to witnessing God's power everywhere. This is a huge turning point, a state often called Fena, which means the dissolution or the fading away of the ego.
But what does Fana really mean? This is so important. It doesn't mean yourself just disappears or merges into God. Think of it more like a veil being lifted. All that distracting noise from the ego just fades out. And for the first time, you can see clearly. You can witness the divine power that's at work in everything around you.
So, the veil is lifted. You can now see this divine power at work. What's next? Well, we move into the 3rd station. It's no longer enough to just witness it. The journey now is about actively embodying it. This stage is incredibly practical. It's about consciously trying to live out those divine qualities, acting with justice, showing mercy, practicing patience. You're not just an observer anymore. You're trying to reflect those qualities in your own life. You're trying to walk in God's way.
And that brings us to the final station. This is the deepest, most profound part of the journey, and probably the one that's most easily misunderstood. This is where the idea of surrender is taken to its ultimate conclusion.
Hanya Allah yang berbuat. It literally translates to only God acts. This is a state of such complete surrender that you realize that even your own actions, they're ultimately moved by divine power. It's a profound shift from thinking, I am doing this, to recognizing that all power, all action, comes from one single divine source.
Now this slide is absolutely key. It is so important to get this distinction right. This state is not the same as saying God is in me, a concept known as HULUL or indwelling. That's the misunderstanding. The correct understanding is the power of God works in me. The agent and the power remain completely distinct.
Here's a really cool modern analogy to make this crystal clear. Imagine a person in this state is like a robot. God has the remote control and is moving the robot according to his will. But, and this is the critical part, the robot's own consciousness, its awareness, never ever becomes the consciousness of the person holding the remote.
And this is where the whole idea just explodes in scale, because this realization isn't just for some mystic on a mountaintop. The argument here is that this principle, that God is the ultimate mover, is the fundamental reality of the entire universe.
Listen to the wording here. It doesn't say atmospheric pressure differences move the clouds. It says Allah sends the winds and they move the clouds. It's not denying the science. It's pointing to the ultimate source of power that's behind the science.
So if you look at it this way, what we call gravity isn't some random, independent force. It's an expression, a consistent, predictable pattern of God's power acting on the universe. The laws of nature are just our descriptions of how that ultimate power works.
And this brings us to such a powerful image, a stone that falls down for fear of Allah. A stone doesn't argue, it doesn't resist, it just submits, completely to the force acting upon it. It's a perfect metaphor for total, unthinking surrender to the divine will that governs everything.
So what's the big takeaway from this whole journey? It's pretty simple, really. True power isn't in our ego. It's not in our own effort. It's found in surrender. And this isn't some weird mystical state. It's the fundamental reality of how everything works, from the clouds to the stones, and yes, to us.
And it all comes full circle, back to this one incredible statement. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is no might, no power, except with God. This isn't just some phrase to repeat. It's the ultimate conclusion of the entire four-station journey. It's the truth you see when the veil of the ego is finally gone.
And so that leaves us with one last thing to think about. If the wind and the clouds and even the stones are all moving in perfect submission to this single, ultimate power, what does that kind of true surrender actually look like? Not for some historical figure, but for you, in the small, everyday moments of your own life.